globe, shall we? Now here is the United States. Let's go all the way over here to the continent of Africa. And here on the west coast of Africa...
Beryl Bernay was my aunt. I thought of her as my Auntie Mame. She lived on the East Coast, rather, in New York, and I lived on the West Coast. So my aunt, Beryl, did so many things. She was an actress, a fashion designer, a pioneer in children's television programming. She was a journalist. She was a photographer. She was, of course, a painter, an artist. She just really followed her passions. And she had many different passions that led her throughout the world, meeting fascinating people. And it was never about, look at me doing this. She was just so enthralled in what she was doing and so fascinated and curious. Also, no, she had been drawing since she was a little girl. Beryl does not have a particular style, and so in painting, that's not necessarily a good thing because you don't have your signature style. However, again, Beryl was like not going to do something just to commercialize. She was just interested in experimentation. When she was young, she did a whole lot of representational art, and she was really good at it. But pretty early on, she was more attracted to abstract. Even though it wasn't, understood necessarily, commercially popular, that was of no interest to her. So she was really all about, honestly, painting for herself and loving the process and experimentation. So she was very influenced by the Cubism, for sure. But she was just like painting at the tail end of the abstract expressionism movement that was happening in New York, and it was very avant-garde and very exciting. So this is the likes of Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning. But her home studio in Amagansett in New York was just around the corner from the Paul Krasner house. But by the time she lived there, they were no longer there. So she was behind them a little bit. Anyway, she was very influenced by that style. I think there's a real vibrancy in each of the pieces, even though they're quite different stylistically. There's really strong colors, recurring motifs. But she would just play. She would take a theme sometimes and just play and take it to all different places and have it look very different. I mean, she loved her pieces. Her pieces were really personal to her. I remember she would say, oh, I could whip out flowers and just sell flowers, but, I don't want to do that. When she would sell a piece, she would sell them begrudgingly. And second of all, I would hear so much like, oh, I wish I didn't sell this piece. I really want this piece. I wish it was with me. She would give her paintings to friends and to people for sure. In fact, career-wise too, she was all over the place. And so that could be a detriment. And yet now, what is it? People are always reinventing themselves. She wanted to do something, and she made it happen.
They've caught a whole net full of fish. Now, there's something very unusual in eastern Nigeria. What does this look like? A pyramid. It's very large, as you can see, when a man stands beside it. What do you suppose it's made of?
She was in Paris as a walk-in on The Skin of Our Teeth in that performance with Mary Martin and others. And she knew that Pablo Picasso, her idol, right, as a painter, was not far away. So as she said, she made it happen, and she put her dog in the car and drove out to the French countryside and found his house and just started literally drawing outside his house, and found out that he wasn't there, that he was off at the bullfights. And they said, well, come back tomorrow and see if you can, talk to him. So she found a place to stay, came back, was just sketching and drawing, and he comes back and he's like, who's this? And the person in charge was like, you need to leave to Beryl. And he's like, no, have her come in. So she ended up spending a few days, and having a wonderful time. And that kind of thing where she wanted to meet someone, Ingrid Bergman, she was a famous American actress, and there was a big scandal when she left her husband and got involved with Roberto Rossellini, and she was shunned by the American press, and so she didn't give any interviews for years. But Beryl was the first American to interview Ingrid Bergman. She met Roberto Rossellini and one of his plays was going on in Paris, and so she met him afterwards, and they had a great time, and she persuaded him to have her meet Ingrid Bergman, his wife, and so he did. And so Beryl was invited to their villa in Italy, and what broke the ice is they had their small children, one of which was Isabella Rossellini. And she just gave them paper and pencil and had them start drawing. And she drew them. It was so non-traditional. It was so person to person that Ingrid Bergman decided, okay, I can work with this woman.
What do you think? Well, after you've eaten one,
she was very passionate about civil rights and justice. And she was not one to keep her mouth shut when she could stand up and make a difference. Her children's program that ran on CBS in the early 60s called All Join Hands, she did that as her way of introducing children to children of other cultures, so that children from other cultures and adults from other cultures wouldn't be so threatening, wouldn't be so much the other. It was nationwide, and it was really, she would say it was the thing she was most proud of in her life, to promote peace in that way. It was on CBS for 3 years, and prior to that it was on New Jersey Public Television for a couple of years. It did have a kind of an afterlife. It was made into 4 films through the United Nations that were then distributed in classrooms. And when the children's program was purchased by CBS, she cried. She knew that it was going to take every ounce of her creativity to have it happen, which it did, and that she wasn't going to be able to pour herself into her painting. It was when she was doing her children's show that she naturally went into, doing photograph albums. Through Westinghouse Broadcasting, she did an article on the use of drugs for pregnant women at Bellevue Hospital, and that really broke things open. And because it was so successful, Westinghouse Broadcasting said, you can choose your next assignment. And so what she chose was to march in the Poor People's March. They got to DC. My aunt was the only journalist that lived there in Tent City and reported every day from there. And then she would tell stories about when they threw the smoke bombs in to clear it out. And she just got this loud, booming voice, and she would, gather the children and tell them stories, and she would teach them how to use their saliva to put in their eyes to help the stinging. She was just that way with kids and children. And
some other things here, too. Let's see what they are. Now, what do you suppose this is? A drug.
She was on Broadway. She was an actress. And one of the things she did, there was a show on Broadway called The Dancers of Bali. And it was the first time that Western audiences had seen and heard the Balinese gamelan and seen the Balinese dances. So she got that and she toured with them. And so, she'd introduce them and stuff. And then when she wasn't on stage, she'd be drawing and photographing and such like that. And they're like, oh, you're like us. We're all, we're all artists. And she's like, great. And they had this great rapport. And she'd tell me the story of, she had this amazing loft in the East Village. Anyway, she'd have the whole troupe over and she had amazing parties there. And she had the whole Balinese dance troupe over. So it was a break between the shootings and she decided, well, I'm going to go to Bali. So and this is way back when people didn't go halfway around the world, especially women by themselves, but she did. She went to Bali, and then from Bali, she went by car, hours and hours to this village where the dancers were from. And she gets there completely unannounced, and they're like, Beryl, what took you so long? We've been waiting for you. When she was in Indonesia, she met the then president Sukarno and got to be friends with him and his wives. And she would kind of be like the storyteller, and she would tell them stories at night and entertain them. And bottom line is that he promised her exclusive interview rights. So she gets back to CBS to do a children's program and says, hey, can you guys train me to be a journalist, broadcast journalist? And by the way, I have exclusive interview rights with the president of Indonesia. And they're like, okay. So when her children's show ended, she got sent along with a CBS crew to Indonesia and this happened to be right before the attempted coup. Really, really big deal. Anyway, she was there and she reported before the coup, during, and then after. And so that was her launch into international journalism. For about 20 years, from that first trip to Indonesia till the late 70s, she would go to Indonesia almost every year. She'd often sketch when she was traveling. If she had time, she would paint as well. But then she would come back and use photographs and her memory, and then do the big work when she had more time. She was so multi-talented. So it was never this conscious decision of like, oh, I'm going to do this. It was just, she really was led by the heart. And the Washington County Open Studios was gracious enough to let us, to make an exception and let her work, though it wasn't produced in the Pacific Northwest, because it now resides in the Pacific Northwest, to have it be a part of the program. We brought it back, we shipped it back, and it was in storage for a few years. And we just decided it really needs to be out in the world. I'd like to share with the world just the unique spirit of my aunt. She was so encouraging of people. She was always about broadening people's horizons, thinking beyond our confines. But I think her time is really now, where we can bust open stereotypes and to really bring our gifts, bring our passions, bring our curiosity to life, and not settle with being pent in to necessarily one thing that isn't fully ours.